Hello, my name is Sarah Deanna. Today I will be presenting on Kathy Douglas and Diane Jaquith, co-founders of TAB. There are four co-founders of TAB, which stands for Teaching for Artistic Behavior. TAB is a choice-based art education pedagogy founded by American Massachusetts-based art educators Kathy Douglas, Diane Jaquith, John Crow, and Pauline Joseph. This report will focus on the backgrounds of Kathy Douglas and Diane Jaquith, the authors of Engaging Learners Through Art Making, Choice-Based Art Education in the Classroom, TAB. First, let's take a moment to learn about Kathy Douglas. Catherine Douglas never planned on being an art teacher, and instead grew up wanting to be a marine biologist. Her father was a researcher and scientist who worked for the Navy Department that improved the atomic clock. She was heavily influenced by her scientist family and went so far as to study under Dr. Eugenie Clark in high school. Douglas referred to Clark as the Shark Lady in an interview with Abby Peto Bay. However, Douglas changed her mind about pursuing marine biology when she realized that attaining a PhD would require a lengthy collegiate timeline. She instead attended the University of Maryland and started as an art major with a minor in ancient history. Douglas later switched her major to art education after enduring criticism from her art professors during her art courses. These memorable college critiques of her artwork would later influence Douglas's teaching approach in the classroom. Douglas graduated from UMD in 1969 and gained her first teaching job the same year. Her husband, David Douglas, was in the Navy, and so the newlywed couple moved around a few times for his job. First to the Great Lakes region, then to Newport, Rhode Island, and finally Lynn, Massachusetts, where they settled more permanently. In Massachusetts, Douglas was hired at Central School in East Bridgewater, which was the largest primary school on the East Coast at the time and served 960 students. In her first couple years of teaching at Central School, from 1972 to 1974, Douglas did not consider herself an artist due to the criticism she endured in college. So instead, she utilized her background in research and science to closely study her pupils from the eyes of a scientist. She began to view her students as the artists rather than herself, and came up with a two-sentence curriculum. What do artists do? The child is the artist. Douglas also came up with the idea of 5-minute demonstrations as a way to give more work time to her students, since all of her lessons were completed in under 60 minutes, and she only saw each student once a week for a total of 3 school years. By including these 5-minute demonstrations as a part of her lessons, the students saw about 30 demonstrations throughout the course of the year. The idea of using 5-minute demonstrations would later become part of the TAB teaching approach. Douglas earned her master's degree in her 40s at Cambridge College. Douglas continued to work in East Bridgewater at Central School and met John Crow, a future co-founder of TAB. She also taught at Stonehill College in the education department for several years and at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, MassArt, with Pauline Joseph, another co-founder of TAB. Kathy Douglas retired in 2007. Now let's learn about Diane Jaquith. Jaquith first attended Bates College, which is a small liberal arts college in Maine, where she was a fine art major. She later returned to school for illustration and graphic design and worked in those fields. When she returned to school from 1986 to 1992 to earn her master's degree in art education, she attended MassArt. She worked toward earning this degree while raising her small children and worked as a museum educator at the Museum of Fine Arts. During her time at MassArt, Jaquith became involved in research, and her advisor was Abigail Howson, who originated visual thinking strategies, or VTS. Post graduation, Jaquith continued working with Abigail Howson and Philip Yanowine, co founders of Visual Understanding in Education. In 1991, Jaquith began teaching on the North Shore of Massachusetts. She remembered being curious about her teaching curriculum and wondering why students loved some lessons and hated others. She began attending NAEA conferences and heard Ellen Robinson speak, which gave her new ideas about students doing what was important to them. In 1996, Jaquith was hired in Newton, Massachusetts, where she met Pauline Joseph at her first faculty meeting. Jaquith wrote a grant so that she could go observe Joseph teaching in her art classroom. What she observed changed her own teaching model entirely. Pauline Joseph was using media centers in her classroom. Jaquith began implementing media centers in her own classroom right away. In 1997, Jaquith attended the NAEA annual convention, where she watched Catherine Douglas present her own teaching model and encourage others to try these methods in their own classrooms. Later, Jaquith retired from teaching in 2016 and became an adjunct professor at MassArt. She also worked in the Summer Institute and helped run Tab Inc. organization. She stepped into retirement in 2019 during the COVID-19 pandemic and began serving in an advisory role to the Tab Inc. board. What influenced the creation of Tab? Peto Bay notes that history and context of the Tab movement is not well documented. However, according to the Tab founders, there is some evidence of influential people and movements that may have provided inspiration and a basis for Tab. During a keynote presentation at the 2018 Tab 7 conference in Colorado, Diane Jaquith described the British infant school's impact on Pauline Joseph. The British infant schools were established during World War II to relocate city children into rural schools. Out of necessity, the schools implemented innovative practices, including vertical grouping, gradual reception, open planned schools, and free activity programs. Other countries became interested in these practices and observed the British infant schools, and the practices became known as open school concept. Roland Barthes, who wrote several books about the open classroom and open school concept, was the principal who introduced one of the co-founders of TAB to the idea of the open classroom. Individuals who made an impact on the TAB founders are Peter London, author of No More Secondhand Art, George Siki, founder of the play-based art teaching movement, Abigail Howson of Visual Thinking Strategies, Lois Hetland, faculty member at Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and one of the two initiators with Harvard Project Zero. Let's learn about the origins of TAB. John Crow, because of his connections with Kathy Douglas and Pauline Joseph, brought the two educators to help teach a class at MassArt called Elementary Art Education, The Cutting Edge. The team ended up changing the title of the course after other faculty disapproved of the phrasing. In 2001, Kathy Douglas was having a documentary filmed in her classroom at the time by Ben Powell, which was titled Managing for the Creative Spirit. And the section of the documentary that featured Kathy's room was called Teaching for the Creative Spirit. Kathy asked Ben if she could use the title for the class at MassArt. With input from Pauline Joseph, the title of the class was changed to Teaching for Artistic Behavior. When Diane Jaquith became a part of the group, she started using the acronym TAB to refer to Teaching for Artistic Behavior. And that is how the pedagogy was named. In 2001, Douglas, Jaquith, Joseph, and Crow decided to transform TAB into an entity known as the Teaching for Artistic Behavior Partnership. Jaquith's earlier research work with Abigail Howson helped her to understand what actions would be necessary to take this next step, including creating a logo, which Kathy Douglas's student teacher designed. TAB started as a philosophy, morphed into theory, then into a pedagogy, and has formed a movement. Diane Jaquith described in an interview with Abigail Pato Bay that she and Kathy would travel and present at the state NAEA conferences, as well as attend and participate in national NAEA conferences. They would find ways to promote their pedagogy and raise awareness about the benefits of a TAB classroom. At the time, the funding for this work was all out of pocket. In 2007, the group decided to gain recognition as a nonprofit organization. The board of directors was composed of Kathy Douglas, Diane Jaquith, John Crow, Pauline Joseph, Nan Hathaway, Clyde Gall, and Clark Freilich. Kathy Douglas's master's thesis from 1993 became the stepping stone for the book, Engaging Learners Through Art Making, Choice-Based Art Education in the Classroom. Originally, John Crow and Kathy Douglas were interested in writing the book together, and then Douglas began working on the book with her student teacher. When Lori started teaching and started a family, Diane Jaquith stepped in to work with Kathy Douglas to write the book. This was their first time authoring a book. The first edition of Engaging Learners Through Art Making, Choice-Based Art Education in the Classroom was published in 2009. In 2018, the book was revised and a new edition was published, entitled as Engaging Learners Through Art Making, Choice-Based Art Education in the Classroom, TAB. In 2019, Douglas and Jaquith transitioned TAB Inc. to a larger board, which later allowed them to take advisory roles. The new board, elected in 2019, released the new TAB website in 2021 and was redesigned by Becca Curlew. It included the TAB Guiding Principles, which is a 3-sentence curriculum. This curriculum is also listed in the 2018 publication of their book. Here's an overview of TAB as a philosophy, a pedagogy, and practice. TAB, called Teaching for Artistic Behaviors, is an evolving philosophy, theory, pedagogy, and practice that dates back to Catherine Douglas's primary school classroom practices in the 1970s. TAB is a layered and complex pedagogy that can be boiled down to 3 simple ideas mentioned previously in this video. Douglas determined 2 tenets of the 3-sentence curriculum: what do artists do, and the child is the artist. Jaquith formed the idea that the classroom is the studio. These 3 sentences are meant to be guiding principles for TAB teachers. The major message in this curriculum is that the students choose both the content and process for their expression as a means of replicating the artistic process of professional and working artists. So let's expand on that 3-sentence curriculum. What do artists do? Here's what that means. Artists practice. Similar to musicians and athletes, artists practice constantly, observing and evaluating outcomes to determine their next steps. Artists make art about things that matter to them, expressing messages and emotions, documenting identities, and spearheading social change are some of the reasons artists make art. Artists work with ambiguity, knowing and sometimes not knowing where to go with their artwork. Artists understand that this is part of the artistic process. Artists reflect. Artists learn to look closely at their work, ask questions of themselves and others, and evaluate process to determine when the work has met its purpose. Artists build community. Art studios and galleries are gatherings of creative people who share their ideas, work, and perspectives with each other and the greater community. So that's what artists do. The artist is the child, or I should say, the child is the artist. In pre K through 16 TAB classes, students experience the visual arts as artists responsible for their learning. Following introductions to available media, student artists advance their individual artistic processes through exploration and discovery, inquiry, ideation, skill development, and one-to-one art making, reflection and revision, self-evaluation, and presentation. Students learn to persevere through challenges and to trust their own judgment while receiving input from and offering feedback to peers and teachers. When students self direct their work, they engage deeply with their learning because the work's purposes align with their values and interests. The classroom is the studio. TAB classrooms are highly structured studio environments with clearly delineated expectations for self directed learning and choices of varied workspaces. Available tools and art materials are introduced to students who can then access and arrange these materials independently to initiate and explore their artwork. And here is an example of that. This center is collage. We believe statement. This we believe statement comes from the Teaching for Artistic Behavior website, and it goes as follows. We respect students as artists and honor their aesthetic. In TAB studios, students are the artists. They find inspiration, envision an idea, design a plan of action, reflect on their progress, persist through difficulties, and see projects through to completion. Students deserve a studio experience that is parallel to how artists work in the world. TAB studios help students to be independent art makers who feel confident and prepared to make art outside of the classroom and the direct purview of a teacher. TAB teachers use the artistic thinking habits of professional artists to model teaching behaviors and help students think like artists. 3, we celebrate the artistic process as the most important artifact of student learning. Art products that emerge from TAB studios look like they are designed and created by students themselves, not adults. They are often a response to what the learner values, involve components of youth culture, and are strikingly different from the whole class sets of teacher-directed artworks. TAB teachers value evidence of student thinking that emerges during the learner-directed art-making process. Number 4, choices maximize engagement, encourage experimentation, and support artistic idea generation. Choices are at the heart of TAB practice. We believe that when students determine the what, how, and with whom of their art making process, good things happen. These include increased engagement, intrinsic motivation, heightened student agency, and self efficacy, practice with creative thinking, and long lasting skill development. Number 5, as an artistic community, teachers and students reflect constantly on their practice. Just as there is no one right way to make art, there is no single way to practice TAB. Instead, there is a community of educators bound together by shared goals and values, constantly reflecting and collaborating to improve teaching and learning. We honor our communities by using group norms to guide conversations. In the studio, students mirror these practices through group reflections and guided critiques to help inform artistic decisions. Number 6, we believe teachers learn best from other practicing teachers. TAB is a grassroots movement created by and for teachers. We believe that when teachers lead other teachers in professional development, all benefit. We trust teachers as professionals. Number 8, studios reflect the emerging interests and identities of our communities and prioritize voices from underrepresented artists. The TAB philosophy values everyone's artistic work. We expand the canon of our curricula to include the works of artists which relate to what is important to our communities and amplify voices that have been historically suppressed. Number 9, The sense of agency fostered in our studios empowers students to be change makers. Art made in TAB classrooms is an extension of the voice and values of each student. When TAB students are encouraged to use personally meaningful ideas to express messages and feelings, they often use art to illustrate their developing understandings and advocate for what they believe in. TAB studios amplify student voices and empower young artists to create art that addresses issues they care about. So that's the We Believe statement. Those are their ideals and ideas, and their key concepts that are part of the pedagogy. What is choice in TAB pedagogy? TAB promotes the idea of giving students choice, which is described by Douglas and Jaquith as a continuum. As student choice increases, so does learner directedness, focus on process, and emergent curriculum. As student choice decreases, so increases teacher directedness, focus on product, and explicit curriculum. Douglas and Jaquith describe modified choice as a space in the curriculum to scaffold learning through partial assignments or requirements, such as with skill builders. TAB also promotes the practice of teachers creating a highly organized and prepared classroom environment with media centers. Examples of centers include drawing, painting, collage, sculpture, printmaking, fiber arts, and many others, including ephemeral or temporary centers, which are open to students for a determined length of time. The centers contain teacher-prepared art materials, as well as seating with a maximum number of individuals that may occupy the center at one time. This media center concept allows students to move around the room and select the center that contains the materials they need to execute their artistic vision in order to simulate the way in which an artist might work. Except the highly prepared environment allows for an orderly and organized studio space. So where does TAB fit in education and ideology? These are key educational and philosophical influences on this model. Based on its characteristics, teaching for artistic behaviors is a pedagogy that fits under the progressivist movement in education, which employs a student-centered approach. Progressivism has European origins in Rousseau's naturalism and American origins in the progressive movement in the United States. So this is the educational contribution or legacy. Because TAB is a recent pedagogy in art education and is still evolving as a movement, and the original co-founders have taken only advisory roles on the TAB Inc. board, there is opportunity for this pedagogy to evolve with TAB and its new board members. However, one thing is certain, TAB has turned into a movement in art education that is known nationwide and in places around the globe. Catherine Douglas and Diane Jaquith have made a lasting mark by publishing 2 editions of Engaging Learners Through Art Making, which will continue to inform educators about the ideas and practices behind TAB for years to come. Thank you very much.